Welcome to the People Productivity Channel, a channel where you can become the best you. In every one of our episodes, we bring on really interesting guests that have important tips and techniques to share with you so that you can actually maximize what you get done in your life, improving your productivity. And I'm really excited to have back on the Productivity Ninja. This interview is the second in a series. If you haven't had a chance to go see the first interview, I think you should really tune in. Graham is the founder of Think Productive. He's written a lot of very interesting books. And today we're going to be talking about work fuel so that you can learn how to fuel your brain and body to create an engine of prosperity for your life. People wouldn't knowingly put bad fuel in their car, but unfortunately, when it comes to their own nutrition and body, they put a lot of fuel in that's suboptimal. And Graham has studied this as the Productivity Ninja, written a great book on it, Work Fuel. And I encourage everybody to go out and get this book, which is a partner to his very first book, The Productivity Ninja, which we talked about in the first interview. Graham, for those folks who really didn't have a chance to see your first interview yet, maybe you could just introduce yourself quickly.
Yeah, sure. So you introduced me there as the Productivity Ninja. So my book, How to Be a Productivity Ninja, it's a bestseller in the UK and a few other countries, Australia, Netherlands, and a couple of others. And really, it started with me launching my company, Think Productive, back in 2009. And over that time, what we've been doing is taking workshops and coaching to a bunch of organizations around the world. So we now have offices in the UK, North America, Western Europe, and Australia, and actually just setting up in the Middle East too. And a range of different clients, everyone from big tech companies through to big NGOs like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and a whole bunch of different organizations around government and other sectors as well. So yeah, really what we're about is helping people to deal with information overload and information stress, and really to change the kind of narrative around time management into attention management. So rather than just managing your time, how do you manage your attention? How do you deal with all the information that's throwing at you? And also within that, make space for what matters. Find the time and the space to do quality thinking, which ultimately I see as the biggest competitive advantage is, finding that time and space to think in really quality ways.
I got to tell you, I remember reading your book and suddenly really starting to focus on not time, but attention. And this movement towards mindfulness and the ability to really focus much better, to use those, limited hours per day to really tune in on the most important things is something of great interest to everybody because, to-do lists are overloaded. And the notion of food as fuel, something that I think everybody should really embrace, is super important. And I love it as part of a complete equation. How did you get
Yeah.
so interested in food as fuel for success?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is there's a nutritionist in this story as well called Colette Hennigan, who I co-wrote the book with. So our names are both as
Mhm.
equally in bold on the bottom of the book. So really what happened for me was I'd launched Think Productive. I'd released How to Be a Productivity Ninja. And I was drinking all of my own Kool-Aid,
Yep.
metaphorically. So doing all the stuff that was in the book and thinking about my productivity and in terms of following all of those rules. And yet still what was happening was at sort of 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, most days, I would just have an energy slump. So I was just starting to get to this place where I was managing my time and attention really well. And I was sat at my desk, but actually I wasn't capable of quality work just because I didn't really feel like I had the energy left. So I then also had a little period where I went through a bit of a
Mhm.
period of depression, was on depression meds for that, and just kind of unconnected to work, really just had some mental health stuff going on. And coming out of the back of that, I really resolved that I wanted to focus on fueling my brain properly and really just kind of giving myself every chance to have good energy in the way that I worked, and also have the best fuel in my body and brain to sort of combat depression and other kind of mental health stuff as
Mhm.
well. So that was really the starting point. And I'd known Colette, who I co-wrote the book with, for a couple of years. We bumped into each other a few times at various different events where companies were bringing us in to do well-being days, and I would do the productivity and work-life balance part of the day, and Colette would do the
Perfect.
nutrition and energy part of the day. So I knew Colette, and I just reached out to her and I said, hey, I want you to coach me in nutrition. So she did something that she'd never done before, which was we set up a little WhatsApp chat,
Yep.
and I would take photos of every single thing that I was eating or drinking and send them to Colette. And then she would send me back a range of messages, right? So sometimes she'd be sending me back the thumbs up and like, high
Way to
fives and
go. Yeah.
that's brilliant. Sometimes she'd be sending back, that's good, Graham, but why don't you flip out the rice for quinoa because there's more protein in it, or there's just something better that you could be doing for the same effort. So a lot of it, and really a lot of the stuff that's in the book is not about having a perfect diet or spending hours and hours preparing stuff or whatever. It's about looking at where you're at and saying, what can you substitute, flip out, upgrade that gives you a much better result for the same effort? And that was really what I noticed a lot as I was being coached by Colette. It was like, there wasn't actually a huge amount of extra effort I had to put in to get better results. So that was maybe 3-4 years ago. And after we'd sort of finished the formal part of the coaching, obviously we stayed in touch, but we also just started talking quite a lot about how there seemed like there was a lot of similarities in the way that you need to think about nutrition and food between what ended up in the book Work Fuel and what was in Productivity Ninja. So stuff like in Productivity Ninja, there's a thing called weapon savvy, right? Like how do you think about tools and how do you make sure you're using tools and apps in the best possible way? And in Work Fuel, one of our sort of main characteristics and sort of overriding messages is be label savvy. So thinking about labels and what they really mean versus what marketers are trying to make you think they mean. And just all those little things just seemed like they were really in tune and in sync between the way I think about productivity and the way Colette thinks about food and nutrition. So we wrote the book together, and I can honestly say in the last few years since I've worked with Colette, I don't get the 3 p.m., 4 p.m. slumps anymore. Like it's one of those things that before I was working with Colette.
People.
Say again?
I say it really is avoidable for most people.
It really is. And I think, it's one of those things that we start to just think about as being nature or normal. And it's like actually with a little bit of effort, you can overcome those slumps. So you can get to the end of a work day, 5, 6, 7 p.m. and still just be feeling as alive and as ready to do great work. And, a lot of that is just really simple stuff about what you put in your body, and not just what you eat, but also how you eat, and just managing those things in a decent way.
So Graham, as a backdrop, you mentioned weapon savvy, and I really like your definition of the productivity ninja as someone who takes control of their own productivity with great systems and clear thinking that cuts through all the information overload and inefficiency that seem to plague our working lives. And there's a set of attributes that go with that. One of them is certain weapon savvy. Maybe you could share a little bit more on that, but let's talk about the others like ruthlessness and agility.
Yeah, so within Productivity Ninja, there are 9 characteristics of the Productivity Ninja. You mentioned mindfulness earlier, that's one of them. Agility, so the ability to sort of switch from one thing to another and be light on your feet in the way that you work. And Zen-like calm, so getting everything out of your head and making sure that you're present and focused in the moment. And probably my favorite one. Say again?
Stealth and camouflage.
Stealth and camouflage. So, sometimes making yourself deliberately unavailable or offline or less available. And my favorite one is the final one, which is human, not superhero, which really talks about the fact that we're often taught to strive for perfection in everything we do. And often I think striving for perfection leads us to believe that we're some kind of superhero or that we have some kind of special power. And really for me, what's important is that we embrace a little bit of imperfection and we allow ourselves the space and the permission to sometimes make mistakes and not beat ourselves up about those things. Because I think as soon as you start thinking about perfection, the downside to that often is procrastination, because you start to think, well, it's not perfect, so I won't put it out there, or I'm not doing a great job with this, so I'm losing confidence or whatever. And sometimes just recognizing our humanness, recognizing the fact that humans are inherently weird, we're all weird, allows you to kind of own that weirdness, and therefore it becomes easier to manage your own habits once you kind of recognize that weirdness is kind of part of humans and part of life.
Yeah, so I love the fact that you're really encouraging people to just be human. Let's start improving. Let's do the little things. Let's make this, a life-changing process where you continue to improve, not just how you work, but how you fuel that work with the food you eat. So what are the benefits that you got other than just, having energy in the afternoon? Not that that's a minor thing, but, this is all about people investing in themselves
Yeah,
and living a better life.
yeah, it's funny because I think for me, losing that afternoon slump was a huge thing. Just noticing that I just felt brighter and happier. Just not necessarily just in my work, but just in my life too.
Hmm.
That was a huge thing. It definitely had a huge impact in terms of some of the mental health stuff I was talking about before. Just improving my general mood,
Hmm.
just fewer of those days where I felt really wiped out or really low. So it's definitely had an impact in terms of depression and mental health for me.
Fabulous.
And that's not to say that eating well will cure all depression or mental health. Of course, I'm not
Yeah,
saying that,
yeah,
but like certainly for me, I noticed a huge improvement in that. And then I think just general productivity. So again, just realizing that some of those hours that might otherwise have felt like almost downtime because you're just, like the lights are on but no one's home and you just have low energy, suddenly I can actually utilize those hours much better. And then also from a totally vain point of view, having people coming up to me who'd known me a long time, maybe I hadn't seen them for a while or whatever, and they say, hey, you look really well, what's happening? And it's like, just like it's almost intangible. Like I hadn't noticed that within myself, and then but it was quite remarkable that once I started that coaching, the amount of people who I'd bump into and they'd say, you look well, you look younger, what's happening, are you exercising more, and all that sort of thing. And it actually was just food. I mean,
yeah.
I'm a fairly moderate exerciser. Like I've run marathons and stuff before, but generally in my week I get out to run 1, 2, or 3 times a week,
Yeah.
depending on how busy the week is. So I'm not someone who's out every day doing
That's
fitness
pretty
stuff,
good.
but
That's pretty
well,
good.
it's fine. It could be
Yeah.
better, but human, not superhero, right?
Yeah.
And like people were sort of putting it down to exercise and stuff, and that part hadn't changed. It was actually just the food that had changed, and people kind of noticing that just in the
Yeah.
way that I
Picking up
sort
this
of
new vibe, this
appeared in
new
terms of
energy.
energy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're showing
absolutely.
up more energetic.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people say, I don't have time to do this. I never have time to go shop for all this stuff, cook. They end up eating on the run. How much time does it really take to eat right?
I don't think it takes much more time than eating badly, and sometimes it can save you time. So one of the principles that's the same across Productivity Ninja and Work Fuel is Ninja preparedness. So that's one of
Mhm.
our characteristics in both books. And Ninja preparedness in terms of food, there's some really nice things you can do. So for example, when I cook a veggie chili, because that's like my that's my special dish, like my
Mm.
specialty dish that I always cook really well. I do it with lentils and tomatoes and lots of onions and kidney beans and stuff. I will never cook that for 2 people. I'll never cook it for 4 people. I'll cook it for 15 or 20 people in 2 large pans. And then there'll be at least 10 portions of that that just go into microwavable, little kind of one
Perfect.
person packets. I just use the plastic soup containers that you just buy in
Okay.
supermarkets. I just use those,
And freeze
and
it.
I've just got a big stack of them in my cupboard, and then I just freeze them. So, that's ninja preparedness. Like I cook it once, I'll eat that
Perfect.
meal a couple of times when it's fresh, but I'll also eat that meal 10 or 15 times from when it's like frozen as a kind of ready meal. So I could eat that, or I could eat a shop bought ready meal that's full of salt and loads of trans fats and lots of
Yeah.
other bad stuff. So that doesn't really particularly take me any more time when I'm cooking that meal for 15 portions than it does when I'm cooking it for 2 or 4. So that's one thing. The other thing is when you're just cooking any normal meal, think about not just leftovers but next overs. So be really intentional
Next
about,
over. Yeah.
maybe just doubling the amount or whatever. And then that thing that you've had for dinner on a Tuesday evening becomes the lunch that you have prepared at work on a Wednesday lunchtime. So again, if you take that in a Tupperware thing into the office, you save the thing of having to go out to the
Yep.
shop. So you're actually saving time, like standing in the queue, bringing it back, eating at your desk, all that kind of stuff. So actually just having that next overs that you can take into work the
Yeah.
next day
Now I know from
saves you time, right?
saves absolute time. And I know from reading the book, one of the things you recommend is don't eat at the desk, actually, right?
Yeah, so in general terms, so this gets onto another thing, which is it's almost as important how you eat as it is what you eat. So the al desco thing, which is very common
Yeah.
here in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same for you guys. You
Same,
know, just
same
kind of
here. Yeah.
grabbing the packet sandwich or the packet salad or pies or whatever it is, sitting at your desk with it. Now, the thing about that is you're probably going to be looking at emails, you're going to be looking at other stuff that causes you stress. And actually, for good digestion, you need to not be in that stress mode. So
Mhm.
just taking that few minutes of time to just get out of the office and relax, put your brain and your attention onto other things rather than work things. What you'll probably find from that is that you'll just be a little bit, less stressed and a bit more relaxed, and that will actually help and aid digestion. So you'll actually get better nutrition from that food
Mhm.
by the fact that your body basically just feels like it's in a better place to be able to digest it. And there's loads of science around that, and
Mhm.
also around the kinds of things that serve our body well versus not. So just getting savvy about some of those things,
Mhm.
really help you to convert more of that food into energy.
Yeah, and the beauty of coming in with this kind of prepared meal that you can just sit down, go out, maybe, leave the office if you can, relax, recharges your brain and everything. Because a lot of this is about not just performing better, but preventing burnout, which so many people do suffer from, right? That extra energy, that boost, that really, all of it comes together.
Absolutely. I mean, I really noticed that I just felt better in myself, and just less stressed. Like once I started eating a slightly better diet. My diet was never terrible. It was kind of fine, and it was occasionally a bit lazy. But I
Yeah.
wasn't starting from, like eating McDonald's burgers for lunch every day or anything like that. I was starting from a fairly reasonable position, but just improving and upgrading that to a diet that's a bit more optimal, just made a huge difference. It's also probably worth saying at this point as well that one of the principles in the book we talk about is consistency beats intensity too, right? So
Hmm.
what we're not talking about here is some kind of really extreme fasting or paleo, or
Yeah.
something that takes a lot of effort and feels like you have to throw lots of willpower at to make it work. The great thing about consistency beats intensity is if you eat consistently well throughout the week, every now and again, if you just fancy having something reasonably healthy for lunch, but uh, you know, following that with a really nice big piece of cake, then that's fine, because
Yeah.
consistency beats intensity. If you're being consistent through the week, then that's actually fine. So there's nothing in this book which really talks about depriving yourself of certain foods. It's all about balance and moderation, and also kind of recognizing that the real benefits are in the long game rather than what you're eating
Hmm.
right now, for this particular meal. So if you have a really bad diet overall, having the perfect lunch isn't even really going to help you that much. And if you have a really good diet overall, a little bit of what you fancy, whether it's chocolate or
Hmm.
cake or French
Yeah.
fries or whatever, absolutely fine. So there's nothing really in here that is too kind of preachy or too extreme. And
It's doable.
yeah, and actually having all of your attention on kind of fasting or some of these more extreme diets, what that does is it means you don't have as much willpower for everything else in your life. Willpower is a depleting resource. There's a great psychologist called Roy Baumeister who's written a lot about this. So we only have a certain amount of willpower each day, and obviously the more extreme the diet is that you're taking on, the more of your willpower you're using up, just on that, just
Hmm.
keeping yourself from eating the bad stuff and focusing on eating the good stuff. It can just take a lot of your focus up. And one little trick about willpower, just while on that subject as well, that really sits in with this whole consistency beats intensity idea, is don't use up your willpower at home. So if you're in the supermarket aisle or you're online doing your food shop, try not to have the chocolate and the sweets and the tempting stuff in your cupboards at home, because every time you walk past that cupboard at home, a little part of you will just be,
Absolutely.
having
I've
to use that
suffered from
willpower.
that. My wife
And
will bring the chocolate in, and then
right, and I'm the
try
same.
it,
Like
and I can't resist.
yeah, I love chocolate. So if I have chocolate
Yeah.
in my house, it's getting eaten. And so how I deal with that is I make a conscious effort to not bring chocolate in the house. But that means when I'm out and about, if I fancy some chocolate, I have some chocolate, you know. So
Hmm.
using up that willpower at home is just a bad place to be. So if you fill your cupboards with good stuff, fill your refrigerator with good stuff, then you know, much more generally, good stuff will follow.
Yeah, really interesting. So, I love the fact that what you recommend in both books is doable, achievable, relatively simple. It is just being a better human as opposed to superhuman. So anybody can benefit from this. Now, in the book, you talk about the ninja plate. What should that plate look like?
Yeah.
Your 50, 25, 25. Um, that's a really simple formula, and I know, it's a relative guideline, but why don't you share a little bit about that, maybe?
Yeah, I was just going to find the page so I can put this up on the screen here. So here is
Yeah.
the work fuel plate.
Yep.
Um, so basically, you can think about this as the way you're going to tackle your food for today, and you can also think about this as a blueprint for any meal. So you've got 50% of what's on here is your rainbow plant. So eat the rainbow is one of our kind of key messages. Really, you know, think about the colors of food on your plate in particular, because even if you think about a salad, you'll get slightly different nutrition from, let's say, a
Mhm.
yellow pepper or a red tomato as you would get from all the greens. So just having a plate full of greens is great, but actually there's more and better nutrition in other colors if
Yeah.
you've already got lots of greens. So making sure that you have this kind of rainbow mentality, you know, stuff like blueberries and things like that are also really great. Just often the colors that we don't eat very much
Yeah.
tend to be the stuff where there's you know, there's kind of extra benefits to be had. And then we've got 25% of what you eat is proteins and 25% smarter carbs. So really, really simple. You know, half of your food is plants, a quarter of your food is proteins, and a quarter of it is smarter carbs. I'm a big fan of quinoa, really nice food grain that has a lot of carbohydrate in it, but also has a lot of protein in it too. So that's a really nice, you know, kind of smarter carb way to think about stuff as well. And then we've got a couple of little things on the side, and these are quite useful too. So thinking about oils and fats. One thing that I really learned from Colette is that it's actually not that great for you to be frying foods in olive oil. So olive oil, just because of the way it burns, will actually put some stuff into the food that is quite difficult to digest. So
Hmm.
it takes a lot of the body's energy to digest foods that are cooked at high temperatures in olive oil, just for the temperature that it starts to burn. So when you're frying, either use coconut oil or butter. So I basically fry everything in butter these days.
Hmm. Delicious.
Um, Ferment, which is, yeah, and this
Yeah.
is the other thing is
Great.
that we've been told by advertisers for 30 years that butter is this awful, you know, evil thing. We should all be having margarines and all these other spreads. Actually, butter is just, because it's much more simply made and there's
Yeah.
fewer ingredients in it, just better for you.
Butter is actually safe again. That's
Yeah,
it.
right.
They're talking
There's the
about
good
how
news.
great
There's the
butter
good
is
news.
for everybody. Yeah.
And then the other two things we've got on here is fermented foods. So particularly stuff like sauerkraut and kefir and things like that. Really good for gut health, because once you start to get those really good gut bacteria into your gut, it just again
Mhm.
helps the digestion. And then hydration. So again, thinking about water, just making sure that you're staying hydrated. So, you know, basically that's all there is to it, is thinking about that work for your plate: 50% plants, 25% smarter carbs, 25% proteins, and then those couple of other little things. I mean, that really is all you need. And you know, I personally don't eat meat, but you can eat meat as part of that. You can also do this
Yeah.
completely if you're vegetarian or vegan, and you know, really, really like following that little formula. I will often, as I'm making a plate of food, I'll just kind of, you know, look at the plate and kind of picture it and sort of transpose that idea of the work
Yeah.
for your plate onto it.
Yeah. I like
You
it.
know, and it's
It's
just
a
a really nice, simple guide to kind of bring
super
along.
simple, three quadrants. I also like, as a backdrop, the notion of, a real plant versus a man-made plant producing what it is you're going to eat. I think that's a
Yeah.
powerful image, and one people should embrace.
Yeah, so really simple rule: eat food made from plants, not food made in plants, right? So
Yeah.
the thing about factory made food is they pump it full of stuff either to make it taste better or to give it a longer shelf life. And immediately, you know, what's happening there is that more of what you're eating is not the good stuff. It's not the stuff that's going to, really kind of give you a boost in terms of energy. So thinking about that kind of plant-made food, another little rule is the 5 ingredient rule. So if you look at the back of the packaging of anything that you're going to eat, and there's a list of all these long things that usually end in kind of "ide," formoxide, and all these kind of different things that just feel like made up words. Once you start to see big long lists of stuff, then you kind of know that this is quite processed, heavily processed food that probably isn't going to give you, the best nutritional bang for your buck. So anything with more than 5 ingredients. And the other one is don't eat food with its own jingle. So food that has songs attached to it, food that has to be marketed at you. There probably isn't an ad campaign that you've seen anytime recently for carrots or
Yeah.
zucchinis or whatever. Like, they don't need a marketing campaign. We just know they're good for us. Whereas all these, confectionery products and everything have to be really, marketed because they're kind of so fake, really.
Yeah.
They have to be marketed with all these jingles and cartoon characters and all the rest of it to make us fall in love with them and become loyal to them. So thinking about stuff in that way too, just the goal of the food advertisers and a big chunk of the food industry is to sort of convince us that stuff that isn't really normal is normal.
Yeah.
So all these kind of fake
Or better.
foods and all these kind of things. And I saw a really interesting documentary a while ago which was talking about the confectionery industry, and what they did in the 1980s in particular was start to market chocolate bars, candy bars as the snack that you can eat between meals.
Mm.
And if you go back to the 60s and 70s, you didn't really eat between meals. You just had
Mm.
3 meals a day. And suddenly it's like they're marketing this stuff at parents and arguably at children too, saying, this is the thing that you can eat between the meal without ruining your appetite. And so, if you think about how do you grow as an industry where you're already selling people food 3 meals a day, you have to find the way to sell them a 4th meal a day. And that's exactly what they did. So you have to think about what the motives are of the people selling this stuff to you. And often, being label savvy with the ingredients on labels and stuff like that as well, you start to realize what's good for you and what's not.
Yeah. And in the book, just keeping things really simple, you talk about VIP plans, which I think is also a good, simple way for people to, think about what to buy when they're in the market.
Yeah, so there's some nice little rules of thumb here. So stuff like broccoli and blueberries, it's just certain things. Chickpeas is another one. Like these, um, like, I think superfoods is a weird word, right? Because it
Yeah.
kind of gives them this status. And actually, in some ways, there's no such thing as a superfood. Like, if you're eating foods that are natural, plant-based foods, natural foods, um, you know, all of those things will have some kind of nutritional value for you. But there is those certain foods that we list in there that really just do have just a huge range of nutritional benefits, and those are the things that become things that you can sort of come back to regularly and just have in your diet regularly. I'm a big one for spinach as well. That's another one that any salad I'm having, I'll throw a few leaves of spinach onto there as well, and often chuck that in with fish or other things that I'm doing, and into curries and things like that. Chickpeas and hummus and all the stuff that comes from chickpeas again, that ends up being a huge sort of part of my diet, really. But yeah, like having those listed and knowing that if you shop for those, have
Mhm.
those in your fridge, then you've got the chance to make really great nutritional foods. It's really kind of simple stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's, I think the key is that you've kept it simple. Also, about thriving on the go, because so many people are actually traveling around the road. And what do you recommend for those folks?
Yeah, so in the book, there's a whole chapter on how to eat on the go, and it turns out that even if the only thing that you have available to you open at 10 o'clock at night is the local
Mhm.
McDonald's, there is a way of eating healthily at McDonald's, and generally the way to do that is to pick up the salads, the chicken salads, things like that, and not throw all the salad dressing all over it, because that tends to be where all the bad stuff is. So you can eat pretty well if McDonald's is the only thing you have open. Likewise, planes as well. So recognizing that any flight you take, just the way the stuff that your body goes through as part of that flight, you're probably going to end up really, really dehydrated as part of that. So taking an empty water bottle through the scanners. So you can bring a water bottle from home as long as there's nothing in it. So take that through the scanning machines, fill it up in the airport just before you get on the plane. And that's a really good way of making sure that you stay hydrated. If you're flying economy, the chances are you're not going to get delivered to your seat as much water as you need. That's
Hmm.
just, there's just too
Yep.
many other people to serve for that to happen. So taking water bottles on there. I will also take onto the plane a couple of things like bags of nuts are really good. I'll sometimes just take a couple of avocados as well. And then I'll usually order, it's always good to order a specialist meal. And the particular benefit of that is you get to eat first. But also you tend to find that there's just a little bit more care goes into some of those specialist meals. I will tend to order what's usually down as either Hindu vegetarian or Asian vegetarian, because what that usually gives me is a nice vegetable curry. And then you can get a credit card out of your wallet and use that credit card to cut up the avocado. So even if you don't have the knife
Yeah,
or whatever available to you, there's always a way to eat an avocado. I've done this at festivals as well and stuff like that. You have
that's
nothing with
great.
you but an avocado and just cut it up with your credit card or debit card or whatever. But yeah, throwing an avocado onto the very sort of overly salty and processed, veggie curry that you get on a plane, at least that's better than nothing, right? It
Oh,
at least means
great.
that you're getting some really top nutrition there, and sort of drinking enough water as well. So, I think on the move is more difficult. It's also where ninja preparedness really comes into its own. So having a few of those little things in your bag, like bags of nuts and those kind of nuts and dried fruit kind of mix things, are really brilliant, because the amount of times that I find myself when I'm on the road arriving into a station or an airport, and it's so tempting to just run straight for the chocolate bars or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas if I've got that really good stuff in my bag, I know I can eat some of that. It'll just kind of stave off the appetite, hunger a little bit, and just kind of keep me going until I next get a sort of full meal. So those are really nice little kind of ninja preparedness tips that just help you to eat well too.
That really helps. I do carry a lot of, dried fruits, nuts, and other things with me as well, but I never actually ordered a specialty meal on an air flight. That is a great
Yeah.
idea. I love that.
You got to zig while everyone else zags, right? So
Yeah,
when you order the specialty one, what happens is there's two benefits. The first is your food comes first,
I
right?
love it. Yeah,
But here's the best bit: if you eat fairly quickly, what happens at the end is you can take your empties back, and also go to the toilet. And there's no queue for the toilet because everyone else is just starting to eat. So
yeah,
it makes everything else much easier. And I kind of think in life generally, if you zig while everyone else is zagging, then life gets easier.
yeah. No, that's a great, great tip. And obviously, you're having avocados, which is a great brain fuel. Other brain fuels, because this is about really just not just your body, but your mind is the primary tool people are using,
Yeah.
right?
Um,
Especially in this digital age.
yeah, I mean, another way to remember it as well and think about it is walnuts are the best nuts. I mean, nuts generally are great. Walnuts are the best nuts, and a great way to remember that is they're the ones that look like brains, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they
yeah.
have the best. They have the best brain fuel. So making sure you eat like plenty of nuts and all of those kind of VIP foods that we talked about before, the blueberries and chickpeas and things like that. For me, those are things that perhaps I neglected a bit before I was working with Colette, and now they're just like a really integral part of my diet.
So, Graham, you've really, netted this out. The key is keeping it simple. Don't put huge hurdles to get over in front of yourself. If you had to net this out for audience, three things. What are the top three things that you learned from doing this?
Yeah, well, let's recap a couple of those things. So consistency beats intensity. So there
Mhm.
is no secret sauce to eating well. It's about doing the simple things and just doing them regularly. It's not about some kind of shortcut or special fad diet or anything like that. So consistency beats intensity. Think about eat the rainbow. So making sure
Mhm.
that your plate has a variety of colors. And it goes without saying that what we're talking there is natural colors rather than the garish colors that food made in plants will give you, right? And then the final one I'd say is ninja preparedness. So thinking about how you can think ahead. Whenever you cook, just double the ingredient proportions, and there you've got your next overs for the next day at work if you're cooking in the evenings. And just thinking ahead slightly, so if I have ninja preparedness in another form, would be just at the beginning of the day, just mentally just thinking through where am I going to be for each meal today, and do I have the resources in each of those places to really make stuff work. I know a lot of people who've read the book who have little secret stashes in their drawer at work.
Of
Maybe
course.
the just a few little kind of salad dressings or things that will just help make let's say just like a bag of salad from the supermarket into a really nutritious meal. Bags of nuts, all that kind of stuff. Like, have a little secret stash under your desk and be prepared in that way. And then that means, whenever you're at work, you can always
Yeah.
turn something ordinary into something much more extraordinary.
It's funny, as I go through life, I'm definitely going to see somebody putting an avocado on a specialty meal on a plane and say, they're practicing the way of the
Yeah,
productivity.
yeah,
There's no question. Well, I highly recommend that each of you go out, get the book, Work Fuel. It matters, but it's really simple, and you can make a big impact on your life, your productivity, and ultimately that leads to your personal success. So, Graham, I'd like to thank you so much for coming on again. Fascinating
pleasure.
topic. The audience loves you, and I'll let you know how many views we get this time because it was really good last time. So, thank you for your time.
Fingers crossed. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.